Let's have a conversation today around grief, something that is often hidden in our society. It is one of the reasons why I wanted to have Mark Longley on the podcast. Mark has his own podcast, Death, Love, Grief and Hope, which he shares a story of losing his daughter at the age of 17. She was murdered in England by her ex-boyfriend. And while that is now 13 years later, he shares how hard it is still to grieve and what we can do to figure out how do we move one step in front of the other and navigate grief. Well, welcome along, Mark, to the Bravery Academy. I'm really thrilled to have you on here because I think there's an opportunity to talk about so much of the unsaid. And it's all really sparked from a few months ago. I listened to your podcast, Death. I'm going to make sure I get it right because it's got the three beautiful little pillars: love, grief, and hope. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Can you tell me what sparked your reason for doing the podcast?
Yeah. Initially, it was because I'm a journalist and I went through this. My daughter died when she was 17 in 2011. And I went through this, horrendous process of grief. And there are a few things that I noticed. And that one of them was, other people find it very difficult to deal with you, particularly when a child dies and they've got children, because they don't really know what to say. And when they say something to you, you can see in their eyes, they're thinking, God, I hope nothing happens to my child like that. And people are quite awkward around you. And I found that quite interesting because you're going through this process that is incredibly painful. And people kind of fumble around you when you really want them to be the opposite. And so that, as a journalist, that kind of interested me. Why do we do that? We're all going to die. Everyone we know is going to die. So why are we so awkward with dealing with death? And then it was this thing that when I was going through this grief, you feel very alone because I think everybody's grief is unique because your relationship with that person is unique. So my relationship with Emily was unique, and it was different to her relationship with her mother and her sister and her grandparents. There were shared things that we all felt, but I think your grief is very unique. And so you kind of feel alone, and people try and help you, but they don't really understand. Even if they've lost a child, they went through their process and you're going through yours. So it's a very lonely period as well, I found. And these things kind of interested me as a journalist. And I wasn't sure how to examine that. And we had a podcast set up at work, and the podcast editor said, why don't we do a podcast on it? And to be honest, I hadn't really listened to a podcast at that point.
Yeah.
But I do now. I listen to them a lot now. And so we just kind of did this thing, and it was a bit of trial and error, and we weren't really sure how it was going to turn out. But I listened to it again the other day in preparation for this, and I hadn't listened to it for a while, and I'm really happy with it. And so it kind of morphed into a bit of an examination of grief and a bit of a kind of help guide, what to do if you know someone who's grieving. And also I kind of thought, I didn't want to tell people what they should do, but I kind of thought I'll just say what I did. And, maybe that will help people. Maybe it won't. And also I got interested in this idea of kind of growing through grief. Like I do a lot of work with domestic violence now, which I never would have done before. I didn't even know what domestic violence was because I thought you can actually take this horrendous thing and you can do some good with it. I just kind of hoped people will listen to it and just get some hope from it, really.
I know it's 4 years since that was released, and people are still finding out about it and going on this journey. My feeling when I listened to it was a love letter to Emily. It was so beautifully done to capture her essence of your relationship as well.
Yeah, that wasn't my idea. I did it with a producer called Maggie Wicks, and she wanted to kind of have Emily's voice in it as best that we could. So I think one of the things with grief is it's directly related to how much you love the person or what the person meant to you. So the more you love them, the harder you grieve. And there's that saying, grief is the price you pay for love, which I don't like. I don't like that saying because you shouldn't pay a price for love. But I just think your grief is connected to the love you felt for that person. So I wanted to show that, I really loved Emily deeply. And it's kind of fine to be sad when someone you love dies because it's a reflection of how much you love them, and which is a bit of a weird concept. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to show a bit of that love and our relationship to show that, you're going to go through this But really, it's a reflection of how much you love that person. And now, I don't ever want to stop being sad because, it shows that I still miss Emily and I still love her. And, I don't want that sadness to ever go away, which is a hard concept at the beginning because you kind of want the sadness to go away. But after a while, you realize that it's not going to go away, but it's a reflection of that love, if that makes sense.
Had you experienced grief or trauma like that before?
No.
Emily's story is very unique in some ways, and then we hear about it a lot more with the domestic violence and that is happening. A call out is made every 4 minutes for family violence in New Zealand, which is horrendous, the amount that's happening. And so you have had to go down this pathway of figuring out how to, change this conversation around both the bigger picture of what she went through and then how we change our society. So I can hear the purpose that you've been driven forward with, and it's amazing. But has there been frustration in that as well?
Yes, there has. Yeah, because, nothing's changed in the 11 years. Perhaps things have got worse. Perhaps we're becoming a more misogynistic society. I don't know. There's a lot more on social media. But I think there's more conversation about it now, which is good. I think that's down to a lot of people. But no, things aren't really changing. But I don't think things are going to really change until we accept that this is actually a male problem. It's not a female problem. And we should stop addressing it as a female problem. We had a case on the North Shore recently where a guy was attacking joggers and the police said to women, well, don't go jogging on your own. Wear headphones when you go jogging. But no one said to the man, stop attacking women. And I don't think we're really going to make progress until we make men the forefront of this.
Can you tell me more about Emily's life?
Yeah, well, she was born in London and I was quite young. I think I was 25 when we realized that Caroline was pregnant. I was 26 when she was born. And a bit like Toby, she wasn't planned. She was a complete surprise. I was really not prepared to be a father. It wasn't something that was on my radar, but she came along and it was just, everybody says having children changed their life. But I remember it was just an incredible moment in the hospital, holding Emily, and I held her in my arm and I had her head in my hand and I just looked at her and she opened her eyes and she looked back at me and we just stared at each other for ages. And it was an incredible moment. And I just thought, I'm not really ready for this, but I'm going to give a good crack. And we kind of went on this journey together. And I probably learned more from her than she did from me. It's hard to describe. She had the face of an angel, but she had a bit of the devil inside her. She was very tenacious and challenging to parent, but really good fun to parent. And, always funny. And we just had this connection that I'd never had with anyone before. And, but maybe it's a parent-child connection, but we were just very similar. We used to laugh at each other's jokes and, we just got on really well. She was kind of my mates as well as my daughter. And you kind of had to strap yourself in for the ride with her, but it was good fun. And, I really miss her. She was a very kind and loving person, but she had a bit of kind of mischief in her as well. So she would be at 15, I would hear her bedroom window open and I'd hear her climb out and I'd go running out of the house and she'd be running into a car and going off into town. So she was, the
teenager.
Yeah. We had episodes of that. She wanted to grow up quickly. It was sad that she never made it to 18 because she just wanted to be an adult and have those adult freedoms. Everybody's biased about their children, but the world really was a better place with her in it. She did genuinely bring happiness to people.
And then I know that you travelled back to New Zealand to live. When did you sort of move your world back from London to here?
We moved in 2003. So we moved because of Emily. She had a lot of ailments. She was born with osteoporosis, so her bones used to break quite easily. But thankfully she grew out of that. But it was touch and go at one point. Then she had bad eczema and asthma. And so her specialist advised us to move out of London because a lot of the triggers were pollution and just daily life. And he thought the countryside would be a better environment. So Karen and I had both been here when we were younger. So we thought, why don't we go to New Zealand? We came over for a kind of recce beforehand. And I remember going to see the school that Emily and Hannah ended up at, a primary school in the North Shore. And they were at a private school in London. and it had a brick wall around it. And at the end of the day, it was like prison. And then it was a very good school, but at the end of the day, this door opened and the kids filed out and you pick them up. And we stood at the gates of this school in Hauraki, and all the kids just came running out across the fields, and the parents were there and they had no shoes on.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, this is kind of a good lifestyle for kids. And it worked. Emily's a bone issue cleared up, her asthma cleared up, her eczema cleared up. So it was a good move from that point of view.
And then she went back to London to study, is that right?
She went back to a place called Bournemouth where my parents were. So this was typical Emily. This was after Carol and I had separated. And Emily, Hannah and myself went back to England on Christmas. And Emily went before me. Emily and Hannah went before me. They used to go back a lot, the two of them, and spend some time with my parents. So they had these kind of dual homes, and they were used to flying over there by themselves. And Emily had flown by herself before. And they had friends there. And Emily's friends were going to a sixth form college called Brockenhurst College, which was near my parents. And so Emily went along for a look. And she thought, I quite like this. So she set herself up with an interview.
Without you knowing.
Without me knowing. Yeah. And by the time I arrived, because Hillary and I came a bit later, we arrived just before Christmas. And she said, I've got an interview at Brockenhurst College. And I'm like, well, you're not going. What's the point of going? So she said, well, I'm going to go for the interview. And I thought, well, they won't give her a place. So she went along and I went with her for the interview, and I sat outside the office, and the headmistress came out and said, oh, we're really happy to offer Emily a place. And so she came back, and then in August, she went back over and started college in September.
How was that for you, having her leave?
It was really hard. It was really hard. With hindsight, maybe we should have made her wait a bit longer. But also, she was kind of struggling here a bit with dealing with mine and Caroline's separation. Mm-hmm. And if you take away the fact that she died, she was really enjoying the college. She was doing some part-time work in a closed shop that she was really enjoying. And, while we all really missed each other, she was kind of getting herself settled down, and she was getting back into studying. And so it was a kind of hard one. But also, she just kind of did it all off her own back. And I don't know if I could have stopped her. I mean, I could have stopped her, but she really wanted to do it.
She sounded very fierce and very wise at a young age, wanting to find her own way.
She's very determined, yeah.
I know it can be difficult to talk about what happened after that. Do you mind sharing so that we can understand what it was like for you?
No, it was, yeah. Emily came back for Easter for a 3-week holiday to New Zealand. And it was at the end of April, I think. And we had this fantastic holiday with her. It was so nice to see her. She'd blossomed as this young woman, and she was clearly happy, but we had no idea what was going on back in England. She was already in a relationship with this person, Elliot Turner, but we had no idea about that really. So she came back, we had this fantastic holiday, and she go back to England, I think on a Saturday or something. And it was really positive. She was really enjoying herself. And then just out of the blue, I woke up on, I think, a Saturday morning, quite early, maybe 4 a.m, and I just checked my phone habitually. And there was a missed call from my mother, which wasn't that unusual because quite often if Emily went out and didn't get back on time, my mother would call me and want me to sort it out. So I thought, okay, well, she's late out or something. So I called, and my dad said, we've got a policeman here. He wants to talk to you. And I thought, shit, she's really done something bad now. She's probably been caught buying alcohol or something. And he said, we've got a body in the morgue and we think it's Emily. And I just thought, no, that can't be true. She was just here. She was sitting on my couch a week earlier. She was full of life. And I thought, no, that's absurd. And so we arranged to fly over the next day, I think. I was very numb at first, and I didn't really know what was going on. And I thought I need to get there and see for myself. I just thought this is a big mistake. There's no way the girl who was here a week ago is now dead. And so I went to England, and I got off the plane, and my brother picked me up, and he took me straight to this morgue, and the policeman was there. who I'd spoken to on the phone, and he took me into a room, and there was a window into another room. And he said, in a minute, the light's going to come on in that room, and you're going to see Emily lying on the bed. And when you feel ready, you can go into the room. So I kind of stood there, and the light came up, and there was a bed, and Emily was lying in it, and she was kind of tucked in, and she looked like she was asleep. So I just thought, I thought she's asleep. You're all being stupid. So I kind of went in, and I thought, and it was like a million mornings where I had to go in and wake her up, and she wouldn't wake up for school. And I thought, it's just one of those mornings. And I'll go and wake her up. And I touched her face, and I remember it was just really cold, and she didn't respond. And that was the moment that it hit me. It's an indescribable moment. It's like everything kind of just comes tumbling down. I remember it very vividly. It's just the most horrendous moment. It's like nothing. It's just like everything crashes apart. And for any parent who's had to do that, it is the most awful experience. We had the shock, the trauma. Then we went through 2 years of a trial court. We had the trial, then he had an appeal. We had the police investigation. We had the media hounding us constantly here, which was unpleasant because you just want to be left alone. But the pain, like I always thought, if your internal pain was visible, you would be rushed to hospital, and you'd have doctors, and you'd have like a nurse, and you'd be on a drip, and then you'd have rehab, and there'd be this whole process to get you back to your life. But you have none of that. We went back to our jobs, and there was nothing. No one comes around to make sure you're properly adjusted, or they've got a plan for you. It is like being in a car crash.
It's the invisible wound that you talk about there, though, is because people move on. It doesn't mean that you've moved on through that either. I mean, I know you've talked about this before on podcasts and other media, is closure is not actually a thing with this, because grief isn't suddenly an end point.
Well, that was another reason actually I forgot that I did the podcast, because I was so sick of people saying, does this bring you closure? Because it's like, no, of course not. This might bring you closure. You might feel that, but it doesn't bring me closure at all. And I got that a lot when Elliot Turner was sentenced. People kept asking me, does this bring you closure? And it's like, well, it closes down that part of the thing, but I'm not even close to beginning, because we've had to endure this trial. I'm not even close to beginning the process with grieving for Emily. It's so, no, closure's just, it makes other people feel better.
The media thing, I struggle with the fact that you are in the media. How did that feel when you were grieving, and that you were treated in a way that didn't feel either compassionate or give you that space?
Yeah, it was pretty bad, particularly when the news first came over, because there were a lot of reports that Emily had died of a drug overdose or an alcohol poisoning, and there were stories that she had fallen in with the wrong crowd, and we'd sent her to England because we couldn't cope with her, and that bit was really hard. And then we had the police in England ask us not to talk to anyone because they didn't want to prejudice the trial, so we had to just sit back and read these awful things about Emily and about us as well, that we were unfit parents. But then when the police charged Turner, the shift changed. So the media here were pretty bad up until that point. And then after that, it became a bit more sympathetic. But still, one of the newspapers ran a series of interviews with Elliot Turner.
What?
So it was really bad. Yeah, before he'd been charged. In these interviews, he was saying how much he'd loved Emily and how he thought she was pregnant with their child. And it was really difficult. But I think being on the inside, I know what the media can be like. They're just relentless with their hounding of a story. And so I just I accepted it. I remember when Elliot Turner was charged, I issued a statement and said, this was before the law had changed. And I said, please don't bother me. But I had cameras turning up on my doorstep and at my work, trying to get a quote from me. And I'm just like, I just want to process this. I want to go home, and I'm walking out of work and there's cameras there, and it's just leave me alone. And I thought I was really good to the media. I gave them what they wanted, but it's just like,
never enough.
No. I now help other journalists in similar situations with the best way to approach people is. So there's some good come of that as well.
I know, that's the hard thing. And you talked about that before around finding the purpose and all the good out of this trauma and experience and grief, because Emily's life is worth so much more than what happened to her. And I think you've actually explored this in your podcast as well, as that post-traumatic growth aspect. And you can't always have that. You can't always have that when you go through something as horrendous as this. But the bits that I have really witnessed for you is that you've found the little moments or ways that you can do that. And they may have been in conversation as a journalist, whether it's in the podcast or when, like you're saying, where it's one-on-one, or even speaking at the vigil for Grace Mullane. When I heard you speak at that, I thought that is such bravery to step up there. How was that, speaking to others at that moment?
I know this is the Bravery Podcast.
It's a weird one, isn't it?
I don't see it as being brave, because I think brave people do these things with a lesser reason. I wouldn't have done that had Emily not died. So it's taken an event to make me do these things.
Yeah.
So I think other people who do things without having that big event in their lives, I think that's real bravery. So I don't know, that's probably a contradiction of the podcast, but
no.
I don't really see it as brave myself. I almost see it as, I should have been doing this anyway, but I wasn't. And it took this event. But the Grace Mullane vigil, it was extremely difficult, because there were so many parallels between her and Emily. And, her father had flown halfway across the world to identify Grace's body. But I just felt this is really sad that we're at another death of another girl at the hands of a man who could have been stopped. As with Elliot Turner, with Jesse Kempson, there were clues all along the way, but no one had pieced together those clues until he murdered Grace, and in such a horrific way. And then there were two vigils, and I remember the second one was by the Sky City Hotel, I think. And I just looked up, and all I could see is people all the way down. And I thought, what am I going to say? So I just spoke from the heart, and just whatever came to my head. One of the hard things about Emily that I found out afterwards is that her death could have been prevented, because there were so many telltale signs, and no one stood up to Elliot Turner. And that's kind of what spurred me on to speak, is that these deaths are preventable. There are always signs, and you can prevent them. But it's like with death, domestic violence, people go, I didn't want to get involved, or they're always arguing, or he's a bit like that when he has a drink. It's like, just do something. Just say, mate, you're out of order talking to your wife like that, or talking to your girlfriend like that,
and they get away with it. So I think that's a really big thing to keep shifting this conversation around how men behave in our society. And it's a global issue. Obviously, it's not just in the UK or in New Zealand.
There's a psychological explanation for it that I can't remember now. But if people like that they'll push the boundaries, and each time they push a boundary, they'll get a little bit more confident and a little bit more aggressive. So it's not an overnight thing. And so if you reel them in early, that's going to stop them kind of growing into eventually a murderer. So it's really important.
For me, one of my biggest questions is, my background is physio, and a lot of the times grief would play out people's bodies for years and years to come. How has grief shown up in your body and your mind in the last, is it 13 years now?
I think it is. Yeah. Well, in the mind, I still get overwhelmed, and I still go to very dark places, and it's like my brain just can't cope and wants to stop. But you can't, because you still got to work, deal with the kids. And so I get very foggy brain still. I just get times now that I just want to go to bed and spend the weekend in bed and not deal with anything, and just lie under my duvet. And I think physically it definitely did. It's hard to know what's age, because I'm 13 years older, but just after Emily died, I used to box, and I got back into boxing. But I got back into it into a really extreme way, and was training every day. And so I kind of
using it as a cope.
Yeah. And also I felt really numb, and I liked having someone hit me, because it made me feel something, which sounds bizarre, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the kind of physical aspect of it, because I felt something, because I couldn't feel anything. But it takes a massive strain. It is like being in a car crash. It's like being in a really bad car crash, kind of internally, and you not being able to walk for a few months. And it's like when you see people walking on those bars, trying to get their legs to work again. You feel like that, but it's all internal. The slightest thing, like getting into your car in the morning, sometimes is a real struggle. But you don't have anyone there saying, "Come on, just one more step, one more step." No, it's like, I think the actor Christopher Walken, I read a quote of his, he likened it to an injury, that it's always there. You just learn to live with it. Like you can't dance for a while, but you learn to dance with your limp leg.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that. You just adjust your life.
What are the things that have helped you through this time?
I think the first thing was, like, after Emily died, I wasn't suicidal, but I honestly thought I would go to bed at night and I think, I've got to go through today again tomorrow, and I've got to go through it again. And I just used to think, I'll wake up in the morning and do that again. And I would have quite happily gone to sleep and not woken up at times, because you just go to bed and you think, well, I got through today, but tomorrow's going to be exactly the same. And there's no end in sight for that. But then I kind of thought, okay, do I really want to die though? And I thought, no, I don't. I'll make people sad at this time. I'll just make things worse. And I'm saying it like it was a logical step, but this happened over time. I didn't just kind of wake up in the morning and think, okay, I'm ready to get on with my life. It was a very gradual process. And I had counseling, which helped me get to this as well. So I thought, okay, well, I want to live. I don't want to die. And also I thought, well, I could become an alcoholic now and everyone will forgive me. They'll say, well, his daughter was killed. So, and I thought, I don't want to do that either. So actually, I'm going to face this. I'm going to deal with it. I don't want to give up, because Emily wouldn't have wanted me to give up. It would have brought more sadness to people. And also I didn't want this guy who had murdered Emily to have more of an effect on our family. So I got these little strands coming through that, and I thought, actually, I do want to carry on living. And it's not just physically living, it's mentally living as well. It's like you can still be living, but you kind of died on the inside. And that's going to happen to some people. That's their situations. But for me, I made that decision that I want to carry on living. And so I kind of started to reinvest in life and look for things that made me happy. And one of those was, we became pregnant with Hunter. And I had this awful juxtaposition going on about how am I going to grieve one child and love another. And it really worried me. But Hunter was born in March and Emily's birthday's in February. And we just had her birthday. And I was feeling really down because I just thought it's so hard. It was so hard to get through those milestones at that point, her birthday and the anniversary of her death. And I thought, I can't do this every year. I can't get so upset at her birthday. And I was at a real low point. And then Hunter came early. He was 6 weeks early on March the 7th. And I'm not suggesting everyone has a child, because, but for me personally, it reminded me of when Emily was born. I've just got to get on with this now. And while there was sadness, there was happiness. But that was quite an extreme thing for me personally. Yeah. But I just think you just find reasons to keep going. It's quite liberating in some ways, because I hear people getting upset about the All Blacks losing. And I think there's got no significance in your life. Like, the win or lose, your life is going to be exactly the same. You might feel a bit sadder, but it's absolutely unimportant. And it sheds you of all that stuff. The people in your life, coming home and giving your wife or your child a hug, or just being with them, these are things that are really important. And these are things that you enjoy, and you can start enjoying that again. You feel guilty at first because you think, why am I enjoying something when Emily's not here? But actually, you can start to enjoy stuff again. It takes a long, long time. I mean, this is years of grieving, but I think you just hold on to little bits of what you can. And, Emily's very much part of our life. We talk about her a lot. Yeah. We've got pictures of her. And so it's nice. The boys know their sister, even though they don't know her.
How did it affect your relationship with Hillary as well, with grieving over that time?
It was hard. Yeah, the hardest aspect was the trial. Actually, that was the really challenging point, because we all flew over and we were all living in the same house in Winchester. So that was Caroline, Hannah, myself, and Hillary. And I mean, Hillary was incredible. It was amazing how she just stood back and let us go through it, but was just there. It was selfless for those 6 weeks of the trial. It was a really tough period though. So we had 3.5 weeks of trial. I don't know if you've ever been to a murder trial, but you're a spectator in the trial of your daughter, and these things happen. And you just want to go, that's bullshit. That never happens. People say things, but you can't. You're just a spectator. And it's just really hard. And I just remember thinking, thank God this is over, because I've got nothing left in the tank. I've just got nothing. But then he appeals, and we had the appeal the next year. And I think after the appeal, that's when I thought, okay, this is when I'm going to really start. Because after the trial, everyone was happy that he was convicted, but I was just sad still. Like the police were happy that he was put away. It wasn't a happy moment for me. I actually thought it was sad. I thought he's gone to prison. His parents are going to prison. And all because he couldn't take a girl telling him she didn't want to be with him anymore. I thought, how many lives have you ruined now? Just because your dumb ego couldn't accept being dumped. It was a ridiculous reason to kill a girl. It's absolutely ridiculous.
How do you make peace with what's happened there then with him?
Well, I learned something doing that podcast. I spoke to a guy called Peter Bray in it, whose wife and children died in a car crash. And he said something to me that you can't live in the moment of the death. And I thought that's actually really interesting, because I can't dwell on the fact that Emily was murdered. I've dealt with that and I've moved on from it, because I want to think of Emily now as the girl she was and in the woman she might have been. I can't live in that moment, if that makes sense. You can't keep going back to that thing. That's happened. You can't change it. I think about Emily not as a murdered child. I think about her as my child, and I think about the happy memories. Child cancer is cruel, it's horrible, but you can't dwell on the fact that your child died of cancer for too long, because it will eat away at you. Hearing that from Peter was a big thing. I thought, actually, I've got to make peace with I don't know what the right word is. I've got to just accept that. And also, that bit's done. He's in prison. There's nothing I can do about it. If I stay there, it'll just eat away at me. And I think that's kind of a hard concept, because it was so big. And that's not how I'm going to think about Emily.
Yeah.
And, the podcast was death, which is the first event. Grief is the second event. And then there's love, and the love you feel doesn't diminish. It stays with you. That's why I ended it by saying, for all that kind of pain, I would go through it again. If someone said to me, Emily's going to come back for 17 years, I would go through it again. Absolutely. Because the joy was just far outweighed the pain.
I know you're coming up to a birthday for her. Next week is her 30th birthday.
It is on the 22nd of February. Yeah. Which is, the birthdays are always hard, but I'm finding this one quite hard, because she was 17 when she was killed and on the cusp of becoming an adult. And now, 30. I remember when I turned 30, I felt like an adult. Your 20s are kind of a mix of things, but when I turned 30, I thought, actually, I'm getting a bit wiser, I'm getting a bit older. And so she would be a kind of woman now. She wouldn't be my child so much. She'd be well established on the path of life. It's really sad to think she's not here. And it's just really hard to imagine her at 30. In 4 years, she'll have been dead longer than she was alive. And that's scary as well. It's just so sad and such a waste of a life. Like, we would have a fantastic 30th birthday. It would be brilliant. The kids, the family, it would be so nice to be celebrating that properly instead of it being a sad event. All the talk of grief, it's 13 years later and it's still hard. You never get to a point where it's not hard, or it doesn't just surprise you sometimes, or I'm really happy because Hunter's done something and I think I wish Emily was here. I think that would make Emily laugh. And it's a happy event, but it's a sad event. But I made a conscious effort to try and raise the children as a father who hadn't lost a daughter, because I just thought it'd be unfair to put that on them. So I try and look at them individually. But I do see a lot of Emily and Toby, which is a bit unnerving sometimes. They've got big blue eyes. Toby's very cheeky. He moon dances into school. I do see a bit of it in him for sure, yeah.
How will you celebrate and honour her then next week?
I think we're going to get together. Her favourite meal was, I cooked this green chicken curry, which is my own kind of hybrid but she used to love it. She would have a breakfast, lunch and dinner. Like, so we'll probably cook one of those and just the family will get together and we'll just remember her. Yeah. I'm kind of not really thinking about it too much because it's one of those things, like I can feel myself getting quite stressed and I think, why am I stressed? And I think, it's Emily's birthday next week. And then the day is really hard. And then you have a bit of a respite the next day because it's 364 days till the next one. But also we want to remember, I want it to be a happy occasion so that we remember her.
Is there any other tools along the way when you've done therapy that have helped you navigate this?
I went through 3 counselors before I found the 4th one that I liked because she kind of got what I wanted, and that was coping mechanisms.
Yep.
And I said to her, it's exhausting keeping control of this grief all the time. And so she said it was like a balloon. You're holding a balloon underwater all day. You need to find times when you can let the balloon kind of free and spaces. And, my home was a space that I could do that. So I would kind of think, okay, I'm suppressing this all now because I'm at work.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go for a walk and let it out, if that makes sense. If you try and keep the balloon underwater all the time, your arms are going to get tired. So that was useful to me. But also there was a point where I was quite afraid of my grief to start with, because it's like being in a typhoon, like you're just tumbling around and you don't know what's going on. You don't know which way's up, which way's down. You don't know when you're going to have a relapse. And it's quite frightening. So I kind of learned that actually I am going to be really sad at times, but that's fine. We'll get through it. Just kind of learning to not be afraid of my grief was one thing. And that tied back to what I said earlier of realizing that your grief is actually part of the love you felt. And so it's kind of it's not a nice thing, but you're so sad because you love the person so much, and, cling on to that love, keep hold of that love. And even though it upsets you at times, when the person you love dies, you don't stop loving them. You keep on loving them just as much. So you kind of have to balance those. There's a comedian called Rob Delaney who lost his son to brain cancer. And he said that the normal life experiences you go through that you think are upsetting and like a kick around in the park compared to the World Cup of grief that losing a child is. And it really is. Like, I remember when I was at school, I had a girlfriend and she dumped me for someone else. And I thought that was the worst thing I'm ever going to experience in my life. But that's like a paper cut compared to this grief. But it's just there's no concept of it. And I hope most people don't have to go through it, but it's a different ball game completely. I remember after Emily died, just going outside thinking, why isn't everybody not sad? Why are people going around their normal life? Do they not realize what's happened? And that's very lonely. But it's a bit of a paradox because you feel like you want comfort. You want people to comfort you, but also you're very kind of raw.
Yeah.
And so you repel people as well. And other people need to navigate that and not come in and smother you, but, just be there for you. Which I think is the best thing. Just, make someone a cup of tea or come around and do their dishes or cook them a meal. Just be there. And then you'll kind of do this little dance and you'll get to a place where you both feel comfortable talking about it, but don't avoid it. Don't ignore it. It's the worst thing to do.
Practical presence is what I'm hearing. So being there is so enough so that then when people are ready, they can be. Yeah, I think it's really powerful advice, because I think we're not good at dealing with others' pain and we don't know how to sit with it. I have loved talking to you, Mark. I know that people that will be listening to this episode will take so many things away from both your resilience, your ability to choose, because that's what I've heard from you today, is you'd make moments of going, I'm going to move forward. I'm going to be a different person because of what's happened. And I'm going to honor Emily in that way. And I've really loved hearing about the cheekiness and the wisdom that she has and how she still shows up in your world and how that's perfectly okay. And how that grief is actually something that we can sit with instead of feeling like it has to be hidden and changed. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for having me on. It's kind of hard to talk about, but it's an important thing to talk about. And I kind of think, well, I'm nothing special. If I can talk about it, then other people can talk about it.
Thank you for tuning in to the Bravery Academy. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're looking to take your support for the podcast to the next level, visit patreon.com the Bravery Academy to access exclusive content and get early access to our upcoming episodes. Your feedback means the world to us, so please take a moment to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for being part of the Bravery Academy community. Stay brave, stay curious, and keep challenging yourself to grow. Until next time.